Serious, people of Reddit who have had extremely distressing paranormal activity in their homes, what's your story? This probably doesn't fall under extremely distressing, but I'll put my story down. The earliest memory I have is of an experience with an apparition. Based on what I know, I was no more than 3 years old when I saw it. Parents didn't believe me, always had some explanation for me. We moved houses and tiny things would happen here and there. But once again my parents always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. There was a full-body apparition that both my brother and I saw as it walked past a doorway while we were home alone. Fast forward to getting married and moving into an old apartment, things start to heat up a little bit. Bins would get flipped over and the contents stomped on the floor. Things would slide off of the back of our vanity, about 18 inches deep, and fly 3 feet to hit the footboard of our bed, not gently. More activity than I had experienced before, but still not a lot. We moved into an almost brand new apartment, and while 1 or 2 things happened, things calmed down significantly. Then we moved in with my in-laws while my husband went to school. Cue the real events. The house would go through periods of high activity, particularly centered around me. My husband would hear me calling him from another room. I wouldn't be calling him. He would see me pass by the bottom of the stairs as he was coming down and would follow me all the way around the corner into the far room, only to dead end with the room empty. I came in from the chicken coop to him upset because I'd been calling him from all over the house. I'd been outside the whole time. It would make one of the dogs go absolutely feral, barking and snarling at nothing. I would have small, soft items thrown at me. I would hear clapping and walking around the house, and the dogs would go looking for what made the noise. Here's the main story. My husband was working nights and I was home alone on the farm while the in-laws were out of state on a trip. One of the dogs goes into an episode, staring at nothing in the middle of the living room, absolutely losing it. Rabid dog. I can't get her to calm down. Usually a light touch on the back will snap her out of it, but I could not call her off this time. I finally go to my room to take a breather and I hear her stop. Maybe 15 minutes later she's at it again. I can't describe how terrifying it is to see her like this, like I said, absolutely feral. I go halfway up the stairs and I'm talking to her through the banister, finally get her to come over to me and stop barking. She keeps looking next to me at the top of the stairs, then a huge slam on the baby gate there happens, rattling the gate and the banister. I ignore it cause I've heard that's the best thing to do when something's right next to you. The dog barks but I get her stopped again. Then right in my line of sight I see a pen slid forcefully off the table, flying multiple feet before hitting the ground. The dog immediately runs to attack, and goes into another fit looking at something next to the table. I start to lose it, immediately go back downstairs to my bedroom. I sit on my bed next to my cat napping there. He stands up and comes to me since I'm upset and crying. I hear the dog move back to barking in the living room, closer to my room. A minute later my cat turns to look at the doorway. His back raises up, ears pinned back, and his hair stands on end looking straight at the doorway. I ran out of the house at that point. That was the worst it ever got. I have lots of other little stories though. I just moved into a brand new house and, knock on wood, nothing yet. I refuse to talk about paranormal activity aloud in any home I stay in, and I think subconsciously I pushed myself to only move into a new construction for fear of stirring anything in an existing house up. With what I know about the experiences through my life compared with where I was staying, I've kind of begun to think I might be a poltergeist. A new construction home was the only place I felt safe moving into. So while my story isn't to the level of a horror movie, I'm happy to be out of old houses and apartments. I've been a witness to many strange occurrences in our house over the years, many of which happened to my, very skeptical, friends as well. We cannot explain this. The strange occurrences mainly center around my father and sister, while my mother and me, thankfully, have only been peripheral witnesses. When I was around 7 years old, me, my sister and our babysitter were watching TV when the blood completely drained from my sister's face. She was 11, and she tries to scream but nothing is coming out. She then says she saw a small, hairy man walk through the living room right in front of us. She wouldn't stop crying. My mother thought she was making it up, but my father was eerily quiet. When I was about 14, my father was screaming at me to leave the glass sliding door alone. Apparently I was violently pulling at it, screaming at him to open it. I wasn't at home at the time. My best friend came to visit me, and this being South Africa, was waiting at the security gate of our house to let him in. He was calling my name and I was on the toilet. We both hear my dad saying he's on the toilet, he'll be right there. My blood froze. My father wasn't home. We had no idea what to make of it. While another friend, the biggest skeptic, I'd say, was sleeping over, me and my sister were discussing my friend's girlfriend at the time. It was the middle of the evening, not too late, and we were sitting in my sister's room. Something was violently throwing the chairs around in the kitchen. The sound was as clear as day. Thinking it was a burglar, we locked the door and pressed the alarm button. When the security guys arrive, all the doors are locked and there's nothing amiss in the kitchen. This was truly frightening. The whole family has heard a woman laughing and knocks on the doors. The TV switches on by itself, volume increases decreases on multiple televisions. Lights come on and off, etc. We hear whispering at night, mostly indistinct but sometimes referencing us. PSSSSSS. My sister's name. PSSSSSSSS. This was a weekly occurrence. My father saw a small humanoid running up our stairs right around the time my sister saw the thing in our living room. He has also seen a woman walking around the house multiple times. This happened about 3 years ago. My cousin was around 8 years old and went inside the house to go get a swimming towel. She starts screaming and runs out of the house, face white as a sheet. She says there was a badly burnt child in my sister's room smiling at her. She was truly shaken and sticks by her story. She doesn't like to come visit anymore. These are just some of the weird shit that has happened in this house, and yes, my family are still living there. My father is an extremely quiet guy, to the point of it being painful, and not one to suffer fools, which makes me even more uneasy about all of this. We're not particularly religious or believers in the paranormal, but enough weird shit has happened to make me question this reality. I'm not religious at all. You might say that I'm anti-theist and anti-deist. I want to understand and see proof for everything. But as much as I rely on science, I do believe that there are some unexplained phenomena that science has yet to find the answers for. Energy, spirits and unconscious communication are some of them. I have done a lot of very serious reading and discovery of shamanic practices over the last 40 years. I don't belong to any group because I think these attract every fraud, phony and esoteric groupie there is. A good couple of years ago we had a live-in domestic who started to learn to be a sangoma. I didn't notice any typical Tuasa things, and it was something she did on weekends and paid a lot of money for her classes. We gave her a lot of support and funding, and attended her graduation ceremony. I had a really nice young lady who worked in the warehouse at the company I worked for. One day I noticed that she was wearing a gallbladder in her hair and I recognized that she was on her way to becoming a sangoma. We had long conversations about her journey. One day she told me that things were wrong at my house, and that she would come to clean this for me. I was very skeptical but agreed to it. One Saturday when my domestic was away, I went to fetch her in the township. Must have looked really odd when I drove into my suburb with 3 sangomas in full regalia, and a car boot full of chickens. They set up camp in the lounge, did a lot of smoke and chanting before starting to clean. I watched from a distance. They then did a sweep of the entire property, with me following at a respectful distance. Then, she got to the compost heap, stopped and grabbed a stick and moved the compost to the side and started to dig in the ground below it. I was watching very closely now. She found an earth-encrusted piece of black bin liner plastic and unwrapped it. Inside was a mixture of herbs and hair from my wife's hairbrush. Was handed to one of her helpers and the search continued. We had a small patch in the middle of the front lawn where my dogs would constantly dig. She went there too, and dug out another really old parcel, and then the analysis and cleaning started. A lot of very deep and animated discussion about the contents of the packages. According to Noti, the first one was moody to make my wife give her stuff away to her domestic, and not to notice when things went missing. The older package was very old but was there so that nobody would see people coming and going. Poor wife, the cleaning consisted of about 10 white hens being slaughtered and her being washed in the blood. Then the blood was mixed with their own herbs and 5 countermeasure packages were concocted and strategically buried around the perimeter of our property. The promised effects were that our domestic would leave within 30 days and that nobody would break into our house. Domestic left within that time frame, and we haven't had any theft or break-ins in the last decade. The Sangoma team cleaned up before they left. There was absolutely no trace of their presence at all. I still can't explain what happened. I was very skeptical. But damn, they found something and certainly fixed my place. My family and I used to live in a house which we've thankfully moved out of. That was apparently a small school before the owners bought and redid it. We were renting. My mom, sister and I all heard our names being whispered in the passage by my mom's bedroom. My mom would often see a little child peeking around the corner at her, and the one day we had people over for a braai and we were all in the kitchen. These people are heavily religious, think small Afrikaans town Christians, and did not believe in anything paranormal. While we were all sitting around chatting, my sister's Bluetooth speaker that is like a radio setting turned on out of nowhere with the volume completely up. The speaker was on the counter where we could all see it and nobody was near the speaker. Then one of our kitchen cupboards opened and closed on its own. They didn't come back to our house for a long time after that. One night my stepdad had turned the heater off and then switched the plug off at the wall before he went to bed, but when he came through into the lounge the next morning the heater was on again. He's the type of guy to just brush anything paranormal off and come up with a logical explanation for it, but he got extra spooked when he was running a bath one night and he only had the hot tap on. He left the bathroom for 2 seconds and when he came back the hot tap had been turned off and the cold tap was on. Finally, my weirdest experience there was when I was in the kitchen making food and I turned my back to put something in the microwave. I heard like a little knock sound, and when I turned to look, one of our kitchen utensils that had previously been on a hook above the counter was sitting on the counter itself. My sister was at school and my mom was in her bedroom on the opposite side of the house. I later befriended the owner's son and he told us that the neighbors they had when they still lived in the house, he was in grade 4, used to come over for braais all the time and were generally very friendly with the family. He started having horrific nightmares and seeing things in his bedroom that caused him to move to his brother's room or his parents' room at night. Turns out the neighbors that came over all the time were Satanists. The family had a priest come and bless the house twice and he stopped seeing things, but the nightmares never stopped and he still gets them now in his early 20s. All my life we've had weird experiences like mirrors coming flying off the wall, hearing and seeing things, and just generally unexplainable occurrences. My best was waking up in the middle of the night thinking that my cousin, who I was staying with at the time, had come into my room and was standing by my bed looking at me. I asked him what he wanted and when he didn't answer I looked closer and realized that it wasn't my cousin. I ended up just saying sorry but I'm too tired for this and I have an exam tomorrow, and I turned over and went back to sleep. When my son was 3 he started having dreams and visions of people coming out of holes and dancing in his room. He said they were trying to tell him something. He also said he would wake up to see faces in the dark and they were screaming at him. There were many nights when his screaming would wake me up and I would run into his room. It honestly sounded like he was being attacked. One night in his room he was telling me about one of his experiences. I saw a streak of white light move up over his face. Another time I ran into his room and he was up on his knees looking around the room. I didn't say anything and just continued to watch him in the dark. This went on for about 15 minutes and finally he looked at me and he said one word, Manya. It was apparently his name for whatever spirit he was seeing. Another time on the baby monitor and we heard a loud male voice say stop that. We happened to know a mother and daughter psychic team and enlisted their help. They tuned in and both said they saw an evil old man spirit from the 40s who brought in other souls to make mischief. He also smoked a cigar. We often smelled cigar smoke in our hallway outside my son's bedroom. They tried cleansing the house remotely. They lived in another city. We thought all was good until one evening we were walking into our dining room to sit down when my son went flying forward into the table. He started crying and said that someone pushed him from behind. We kept our son in our room that night and my wife and I both heard what sounded like an old man making gagging noises from my other son's room. He was 11 months old. Our friends put together a whole team and they came and cleansed the house. It was quite a process and our neighbors probably thought we were real weirdos, but they got the job done. We haven't had any issues in 10 years. It was really scary. We live in an approximately 150-year-old farmhouse, with a cemetery across the road that hasn't seen a burial since 1870. Apparently the records office burned down, so they lost the exact plot locations and just opened up another cemetery 300 feet west of us. About a week after moving in, my wife and I were eating dinner, and my phone, which hadn't been touched in quite a while and was sitting on the kitchen counter, says in Siri's voice, "You are in my realm." And nothing more. We both heard it clear as day, and there was no history of the phone saying it. Then my cat was absolutely relentless in getting me out of bed in the middle of the night. At first I shrugged it off, but then got thinking maybe something was on fire or whatever. She led me downstairs, nothing. I went outside to see if there was anyone out there, and it was the deadest silence I've ever heard in my life. I noped out of that and came back inside. When I went to go back upstairs, I stood in something cold and wet. I bent down to see what it was, and my feet were totally dry. It was just a very strange cold spot. When I stood up, the feeling of a hand on my shoulder was unmistakable. The cat was just staring at me very intently. TV remotes go missing constantly. I think we've lost 6 now. I've had every single piece of furniture out of the TV room, as I renovated the whole thing, never found one. About a year and a half after moving in, I bumped into a former coworker at a flea market who knew where I lived but hadn't been told about any of the occurrences. She said, "Go introduce yourself to those people over there. They lived in your house in the 80s. So I did, and the first thing they asked was, "How is the ghost doing?" They said it had a fondness for messing with the TV and would open doors, sometimes at very useful times, like when carrying a bundle of firewood. And one more addition to the story, a good friend of mine, who I met after moving here, and again, never mentioned any of this stuff to, was standing in my driveway and just randomly said, "Dude, there is some strong spirit activity here." Wow. My childhood home was notoriously haunted. We moved into the house when I was around 6 and my brother was 3. It started slow with him and I seeing weird things at night and constant nightmares. Things would go missing only to return a few days later. We would constantly hear people talking, footsteps, and doors slamming when no one was around. Over the years it started to escalate and there are a lot of stories, so I have included a few. One parent was in their bedroom during a party when they heard a child running and the door to their walk-in closet creaked shut. She assumed it was me or my brother and went to open up the door. When she did, some of the t-shirts that were hung close to the floor were swaying. Peeking out from behind them was a little girl she did not know. The little girl vanished before her eyes. I was home alone waiting for my BF to come over. I heard him call my name, so I came out of my bedroom and headed towards the front door. When I came to the stairs that separated my room from the front door, I saw this thing. It almost resembled a person, pitch black, crawling up the stairs. It cracked its neck to look up at me and I ran. I called my BF and he wasn't there yet. I hid in my room until he came. The last one I'll put is after my family moved out, we rented it for a while. The tenant complained of similar things that we experienced in our first few months there. He went out of town and left his dog in the garage. His friend came to check on it and the dog was missing. He later found the dog, who was fine, just scared, locked in the crawl space that was completely separate from the garage and 2 closed doors away from where the dog was left. This crawl spaces was the worst place in the house for negative activity. This happened when I was 11 and visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside considering we had been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day. No one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a quick tour. As I played outside, a really beat-up ball rolled up to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him and he wandered away. I didn't think any about it, but when my parents were done with the tour they asked what I did. I told them something along the lines of I was just wandering around. Oh, and I helped this kid get his ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid he looked startled because, as I mentioned earlier, there was no one other than us at the lighthouse. Only 3 cars. My parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at a picture in the lighthouse. I know this sounds super cliche, but when he showed me the picture, it was the picture of the exact same boy with the exact same beat-up ball. Apparently, that kid died at the lighthouse. On a side note, we checked around and there was no boy. So you might be asking me, why was this creepy? Especially considering that the boy never scared me or tried to scare me. What creeps me out is that I'd touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report a ghost, not other objects. Assuming that was a ghost with his ball. What the heck did I touch? Also, it felt solid, like a real ball. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what I touched? This still bothers me to this day. My story isn't extremely distressing, but it's halfway there. When I was younger, 4th-5th grade, I lived in a small house that was really dark and quiet at night. I always woke up around what it felt like midnight most nights and would look for something to eat in the kitchen. So one night, as per usual, I woke up and went to grab the first slice of bread from the new bread my mom bought that day. The kitchen is completely dark besides from the two small windows that were fogged so no one could look in. There was this small corner around my fridge that was just dark. Like darker than the rest of the kitchen even when there was light hitting it. However, I was partially asleep so I didn't think much of it. So when I went to grab the slice of bread something hit me in the face. I went to wipe it off my face and all I felt were just long fingers. I was terrified and ran back to my room, and as I ran I could hear and feel something chasing me, and I could hear all kinds of things falling behind me as I ran back to my room frightened. When I got to my room I shut my door and felt my eye and it was bleeding. To this day I have a scar. Never have I encountered something that terrifying again. Many years ago I had a Ford Escort I really loved. One day I noticed the back right wheel was missing a single lug nut. No biggie, replaced. Soon though, one is missing on the same wheel. I assume the thread is stripped, but the shiny new lug nut is still there. Different one missing. This keeps happening and I assume all the threads are stripped a little bit. I don't want to lose a wheel though, so I get all new studs, go through the pain of driving the old ones out, way harder than I thought it would be, and get all new lug nuts to go with it. Before the week is out, I'm down one lug nut. I start checking my car every night and then again in the morning. Yep, disappearing overnight. Not on the ground either. Aha! I have a prankster. Feeling this is annoying but no big deal. Very small town. I go sell some blood plasma a few times and then buy a big old bag of lug nuts. They keep vanishing and I keep replacing them, but then I notice one vanishes sometime after leaving for work and before I got home. Fallen off while driving? Weird. Coincidence? They're still occasionally vanishing overnight about once a week randomly. I start making marks in my owner's manual, morning before I leave, when I arrive at work, when I leave for work, when I get home. I check their tension frequently. Occasionally one is loose. This fits the random falling off but doesn't explain overnight disappearance. Sometimes it vanishes while I'm driving. Sometimes overnight. At least twice while in the parking lot at work. I'm beginning to feel very weird about it. It just doesn't add up. I keep writing stuff down as if that'll make it make sense. I carve symbols into the lug nut tops with a screwdriver to tell them apart: heart, spade, diamond, club, and it is definitely different ones vanishing. Not always the same location. I can't explain it. Finally I try a dangerous experiment. I simply let it run with 3/4 lug nuts. Cautiously at first, checking tension on the 3 remaining ones because I imagine the wheel falling off at highway speeds. But over time, nothing happens. I kept the car almost 2 full years after that and my back right wheel always just ran with 3 lug nuts. The only time I had one disappear was when I got new tires and the shop put a new one on. Once it vanished though, I let things be and it was always fine. Still no idea WTF that was. I don't know how disturbing it was really, but so odd. I am now curious what would have happened if I had had some kind of surveillance footage of the car at night. I wouldn't say distressing, but it's a big reason I keep my bedroom door shut while sleeping. Also a big reason I keep the lights on at night. When I was in middle school, I kept my bedroom door open one night. That night my father was out drinking or something. I say something, as he was cheating on my mother at this time, so who's to say, he didn't come back by the time I went to bed. So when I heard the front door slam shut in the middle of the night, I thought, Dad's home. Then I went back to sleep as I heard him walk up the stairs to the living room. The house I lived in, for context, had stairs right as you enter through the front door or garage door, up to the living room and down to the basement, then more stairs when you walked up, leading to the bedrooms on the 3rd floor that were over the garage. Never heard him walk up to my parents' bedroom that was in view from my bedroom door. I felt something was watching me. I woke up slowly to see what I presumed was my father in the doorway. I squinted at him because he plays jokes like this, trying to scare me and my sisters. When I got a good look at the man in the doorway, I couldn't see any features. I went to wipe my eyes and get a better look at him. I stared at the man and 2 wide eyes stared back. I realized this wasn't my father. I didn't scream, or jump back in fear. Instead I did what any sensible person would do. Cover my face and hide in my sheets. I heard the man walk over to my bed after I hid. I could feel him still staring at me. He was close enough I could hear him breathing. I just cried, hoping it was all a dream, or a prank my dad was playing on me. I eventually cried myself to sleep. I woke up that morning scared out of my mind, to find my father sleeping on the couch. I didn't tell anyone about what happened at the time. I didn't have the best relationship with my father, so I never approached him about it either when he woke up. However, I asked my mom when Dad got home and she didn't know, as he never came to bed. I slept with my door closed from then on, when I would sleep on a couch or a room with no doors from that night onward. I always felt someone was watching me from the corner of the room. But as I got older it slowly stopped happening. He now seems to come back when I drive at night. Sometimes I think I see him in my back seat or on the sidewalk. So I think whatever this is, it's still attached to me, but I have never seen him as clearly as I saw him that night he stood in my bedroom doorway. Don't mean to leave it like that. But nothing else has happened, nor has he shown himself the past 4 months. So it's good for the time being. From Indonesia, where paranormal activities are quite normal here. But then I had this one disturbing experience. One day I went into my uncle's home in Geneva. He loves collecting statues or historical stuff. Then I got a duty to take out the trash that day, and I went to the basement where his office room at. It's a small room like 2 by 3 meters. Then somehow I saw a statue of a goddess with 4 or 6 arms, and the aura in that room just suddenly cold. There were 4 rooms in the basement. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, office room, and storage room. Somehow after I took all of the trash, I cannot find the stairs to go back. It's gone. Literally. Gone. I was quite panicked, and then I smell some strange scent, like an ancient flower. I went into the office room and I spoke to the statue. "Hey, I am sorry if I disturbed you in ways I cannot imagine. I need to go back upstairs, okay? Just let me go." Then after that, I can see the stairs again. But after that, it took me years to be able to go to any basements. My family moved into a newly built home in a small town that my dad immediately insisted was haunted. None of us experienced anything important, since my mom has previously lived in a house she believed was haunted, my sister and I too, but we were too little then to remember any of the events she says we experienced. So we waved Dad's concerns off. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, I'm around 25 at the time. We've got the house on the market and most of my family has moved out. I live there with a friend who needed a place to stay, and with my little brother staying part-time. And our 2 cats. I've moved into the master bedroom. One night, I'm woken up by the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I usually leave it open a little so the cats can come and go, so I figure it's one of them. But as I roll over, I realize they're both in bed with me. So I look toward the door and see a humanoid shape slink into my room. I use the term literally, it was trying to stay quiet and keep a low profile. At first I think it's my roommate. She, comes in once in a while. But then I remember she's not home. Mind starts running fast. Little brother? No, he's not home either. Conclusion, I'm home alone and there's someone in my room. I start to get up, and this figure starts clicking and gibbering at me. No words. My eyes are adjusting, and I'm looking at this feral, hairy, humanoid shape. About 4 feet tall. Best description I can give is goblinoid. And naked. As I'm realizing I can identify it, the thing lunges at me. I defend myself with the only option at hand, a super heavy blanket I sleep with. The creature has me on my back, pinned on my bed, and is just wailing on me. Scratches and punches. The scratches are running off the blanket, heaviest, thickest blanket I've ever had, but I can feel the punches. I've accidentally pulled the blanket over my head, as I was still gripping it when I brought my arms up to protect my face. Here's thing 1, I was bullied and left alone a lot as a kid. I overcame a lot of fear and loneliness. I had come to pride myself on my ability to handle threats and situations, and that included the unsubstantiated belief many of us develop that we'd handle a supernatural situation well. And I don't want to let myself down. Every monster has a weakness, and I don't want to let this one do whatever it is doing without a fight. I thrust both arms upwards to knock this creature off balance, and then roll to throw it off me. And as soon as I do, it disappears. I'm sitting up in my bed, sweating and breathing hard. My cats are awake now, looking at me like nothing's wrong. But I can still feel some of the harder hits that creature dealt. Hell, I can smell it. The room is dark, but dead silent, so after a moment I bound out of bed and start turning lights on. Nothing. I went through the whole house, and grabbed a knife in the kitchen. Nothing and no one. A dream, right? Well, here's thing 2, I'm a lucid dreamer. I know when I'm dreaming. Also, You know how a lot of people say they can't fight or throw punches in dreams? I can. But it takes conscious effort. And I didn't feel any of that. It just didn't feel like a dream. Still, that's the cleanest answer, right? Especially given my cat's lack of panic. Just a dream. And I had myself convinced of that until a few years later, so I didn't tell anyone about it. But my brother and I left the house before it was sold, so my sister moved in and was living there with her boyfriend and their friend. I didn't learn about this until a few years after the house did sell, but they started hearing shit. Including the clicking and gibbering of my feral goblin, this drew many and I told you so from Dad, so, to this day 15 years later, I dunno. I am not sure it was a dream. When I was a child, in my grandma's house, I woke up on the couch one day and saw a jinn/ghost/whatever you wanna call it just standing stare at me. I ran to my family crying and screaming. 15 years later, my mom, who had no idea about this, tells me how there was a jinn/ghost in my grandma's house that her, my grandma, two of my uncle all have already seen. I live on the second floor of a 2-story apartment built in 1912, which originally was a mansion for some of the wealthiest in my town. I've had multiple occurrences where I'd be home by myself, and I'd hear whistling. Short tunes, usually only 2 notes or so, but they were so clear and I could never figure out where it was coming from. My mom often tells me the story of when she was all asleep and dreamt of an older woman who seemed to be dressed in a more old-fashioned way slowly walk into her room and sit on her bed. When my mom woke up, she could still feel the pressure of someone sitting at the foot of her bed. When my mom sat up to go use the bathroom, she felt something slowly and gently push her back down onto her bed. Eventually, my mom was able to get up out of bed, but she could never figure out WTF happened. I have a ghost of a boy who died in the 20s in my room, and he literally steals things from planned sight when you look away and then they're gone, and the only way to get that object back is to politely ask him for it. It then appears either somewhere that was searched multiple times for said objects of where it is physically impossible to get there. The basement was angry. First night renting a duplex, spouse and I were unpacking and multiple items flew off a shelf. We went upstairs for the night. This happened multiple times in our 4 years of living there. We would often get the sense that we were being watched in the basement. It's hard to describe, but the feeling was that we just weren't welcome down there. By coincidence, I later ended up working with a woman who had lived in the place years before me. Her husband killed himself, violently, in that basement. My family has always seen, heard and been around paranormal stuff. I have 2 that are final proof to me. One is distressing and the other has so few logical explanations. Distressing first, I had a friend that would crash at my place all the time. Slept in the lounge and struggled to sleep. Never said why, just complained. My mom asked him if he's seen a lady in white and he said pretty seriously, so she is real. Apparently comes in the back door and walks down the passage towards my room or vice versa. Now before this talk happened, my GF at the time always woke me up to walk with her to the toilet to stand outside and walk back. I am scared of the dark too, but whatever, I can do it. Now it was my friend who asked her if she had seen the lady too, and they were talking about it. For those curious, I and my sister have seen since. We sleep on the opposite side to my mom. The proof one is in a hallway with no windows. We have a whiteboard. It's hung perfectly level, no funny business with the pen tray. South Africa has no, rarely ever, earthquakes. The door is next to but was closed on this occasion. All was still and calm. My dad and I were talking about the ghosts and what we hear and think when a pen launches off the tray for the whiteboard, as if somebody casually swept their hand out from whiteboard to edge of the tray. So the pen flew off horizontally. No cats and nobody was standing within a meter of it. It wasn't violent, but like you popped it off onto the floor to annoy somebody and make them pick up. Not that I'm saying that was an intention, but the kind of trajectory it took. Didn't spin, so it wasn't an edge catching. There are no edges. It was just on the tray in the middle. It wasn't extremely distressing, but it did spook me for a while. I was 12 years old in my home country in Kyrgyzstan, and I was at my maternal grandma's house. So there is this little narrow passageway that comes from the back door of the house to the garage. We have weird house layouts here. And I was walking through the passageway. I heard a whisper in English. People here don't know English that well, and the only people who spoke fluent English was me and my brother. That said, I know who you are. I turned around, and to my horror, I saw no one. So I ran to the garage, exited the garage and went to the kitchen while my heart was beating extremely fast. I told my uncle about it, but he didn't take me seriously and laughed it off. To this day, I still don't know what happened. My first home was purchased in 1998, in St. Petersburg, FL. My mother got the listing because the owner's nephew found her business card on his aunt's fridge. The aunt didn't die in the house. She was quite elderly, and died in a home. St. Pete has a few. I met Helen, the aunt and previous owner, a few years later. One night, while lying in bed watching God only knows what on the TV, I looked up toward the master bedroom door. Helen stood in the doorway, in a nightgown. She was quite pretty. She was very young. My wife slept next to me, oblivious. My two young boys were undisturbed, as were the dogs. I was 33, sober, and I know what I saw. It was peaceful. She made her one appearance and left. I think she was just passing by. Good energy visit, I think. When I was around 5 years old, late 1970s/early 1980s, we lived in a haunted house in South Florida. This house was probably built in the 1960s, so not all that old. I can only remember some of the incidents. We would often hear footsteps coming from the attic and other loud noises that could not be explained. Sounds of furniture being moved around with nobody in the room. I specifically remember one morning lying in bed, a face appeared on the wall above my bedroom window and repeatedly told me to go to my parents' bedroom. No idea why it wanted me to do that. But I can still remember it plain as day. Apparently, my older sister and mother also had several experiences while we lived there. My mom was home alone cleaning the house up right after we moved in. She opened a door to one of the bedrooms and there was a young man standing in there, completely still. She said she didn't feel frightened, but didn't know what to do. She closed the door, waited a minute, and reopened it, and he was gone. I asked how she knew it wasn't a burglar or someone sleeping in there, but she said she just knew he wasn't real. Not sure how to explain that one. Things just started missing. Clothes, cable, stuff either disappear or change places. I always blamed it on me forgetting where I put them, but it felt wrong and weird. Till one day it just stopped. I have no explanation to this other than just something, someone or whatever was messing with me. When I was young, around 10, I'd often stay up late to watch Adult Swim or play video games. One night, my cousin had stayed over and we were talking about TV shows like So Weird on Disney, and just general creepypasta stuff. As we are talking, we noticed the light in the other room switches on. For context, my room used to be our garage, which we split in half to form two rooms that were conjoined by an entryway that I used to hang a bedsheet to act as a door for privacy. Well, we didn't think much of it, because you can turn that light on from the main hallway, and maybe someone switched it on by accident. Things got strange when the lights ended up intensifying. It grew so bright it was as if there was a mini sun in the other room. As bright as it was though, none of the light had diffused into my room. We were freaking out, yet somehow built enough courage to get out of bed and walk closer to the hanging bedsheet. As we stepped closer, the TV in the other room switched on and was playing TV static. We froze in horror, unable to see anything besides the light in the other room and the hissing of the TV. Suddenly, the already blinding light pulsed brighter. The TV got louder. The light suddenly turned off. The TV was still hissing at us for a few seconds, the dim blue glow spilling into my room. The room light surged back to full radiance as before, flashing rapidly, then nothing, total silence. Complete darkness. As if nothing even happened. My cousin and I hid under the covers until morning. That house was haunted. Back when I was in high school, I had a friend whose family moved into a new house. Come to find out, it was a gateway to hell. Lots of photo, video, and even audio from the house. Well, the worst one was a picture of a face you saw in a second-story window. The worst part was every time we would look at the photo or show someone, something bad would happen to my friend. Needless to say, we don't open that photo anymore. So I live in the Midwest, and the shit that goes on around my house is pretty messed up. We never really said it out loud, but no one ever went in the woods behind the house. It was like an unspoken rule. Even inside the house with the window facing the woods, my parents only closed those curtains for that specific window. To the right of my house is a very large field we used to plant corn or soybeans for our farm, and behind our house is miles of woods. Our neighbors live about a 15-minute drive away, so we're separated by a lot of miles. I remember growing up as a kid, and me and my sister and brother would play this game called Ghost in the Graveyard. It's basically hide and seek, but it was in our long driveway and front yard, and you play it at night. I remember one July when I was 9, me and my cousins were playing Ghost in the Graveyard. One older cousin was kind of a jackass, and wanted to play in the woods because it was scarier. And with us being kids and I being the youngest, we played in the woods. The whole thing felt so off. I hid behind this massive tree right next to the field. We had flashlights, but you had to turn them off in order to hide. So I was sitting in pitch dark, and the only thing I could really see was the field next to me. 1 second you could hear crickets, owls and frogs, and then it went super quiet. About 5 minutes into waiting to be found, it began to smell like literal sewage. Like shit and rotten meat were mixed into a blender. So I stood up and looked for my cousin, turned my flashlight. I remember gagging as I walked because it smelled so bad. As I walked there wasn't any noises or anything that scared me, I just felt like something was following me. So naturally, 9-year-old me started crying, running and calling out for help. My cousin found me, and we were yelling for the other kids to come back to the house because we were done playing. No one responded, so we went in the house to grab the adults to tell everyone to come inside. We grabbed my dad, and he came outside and yelled for everyone to come inside. There was no rustling or even a response. So my dad grabbed his flashlight and went out and helped us look. Eventually all the adults came out to look because we had no idea where the kids were. Everyone started panicking, and my dad pulled out his truck and his deer spotlight to see if we could find them along the trail. We stayed out looking for them for about 5 hours, and finally we found the first kid. Nothing happened to him, but he would have had to take a car to wander out that far into the woods. It was literally miles. Same with the other kids that we began to find by morning. Each kid had the same story. They heard our voices calling from the farthest side of the woods, opposite to where our house was, and they were trying to get away from the smell. Now on Thanksgiving we always talk about it, and even thinking about the smell now makes me gag. Not super distressing for me but my family. I don't really believe in ghosts now but my family does. And even though I don't remember it fully clearly, my parents and brothers said we lived in a haunted house back in Colorado. I was just 4 or 5 at the time, so it's really early memories, but they told me what they could remember. My brother's main experience at that house was a nightly occurrence. He would go to bed around 10 and be kept up for hours by the sound of old ladies laughing. Sometimes he would sort of hear them talk, and he believed they were playing a game with each other. I don't think any old people lived there before us, and the only neighbor we had was a man who lived across the street alone with his dog. My dad recalls waking up and seeing a woman dressed as a nurse at the end of his bed. He thought it was my mom at first, but mom was usually at work by the time he got up. The woman walked up to his side of the bed and told him to go back to sleep, then she walked out of the room. He went to follow her but she was gone. My mom would hear voices coming from all sorts of places. The basement, the attic, and from behind closed doors. She never found anyone when he would look around. She would also see lights floating around the backyard, not like fireflies but more orb-like. I don't remember any ghosts interacting with me, but my mom said that most nights she would find me dead asleep under my bed. This was a pretty big bed for a 4-year-old, by the way. I needed help just getting on there, so if I feel off I would absolutely be woken up. Most of what I remember were the weird stuff involving animals. One time 2 water snakes swam out of our kitchen faucet. There would be black bears in our yard and at our door all the time because we had no fence, just a big hill. Overall, the only spooky thing I fully remember was a big shadow figure in our shed. It was always locked and filled with stuff, so I couldn't get a good look at it. But I remember it moving around a lot. When my aunt used to live at my grandma's house, she used to sleep on the couch in the living room. The floor is a tile floor throughout the house except the bedrooms. She said that at around 3 a.m. she would sometimes hear a person walking up and down the hallway and what sounded like chains being dragged behind them, but no one was there. Had a basement apartment in New York. Here and there the place creeps me out, and I don't like to stay there alone. One night I awoke from a dream and felt air rushing past my ears into the wall. Gale force wind strength. Another night, I awoke with sleep paralysis so bad I swear I couldn't move for an hour. I tell all this to my BF and he doesn't believe in that sort of thing, so he shrugs it off. Says he feels fine. One evening, after a bit of fun, we are up very late and snuggling. We hear a car come up the driveway and park. We hear the gate latch and the back door. Footsteps walking around upstairs. Not 2 minutes later, I shot out of bed staring toward our bedroom door, begging for whatever is there not to come into the room. I could feel the presence and it felt evil. I am freaked out and shaking like a leaf. He's trying to calm me down but could see how upset I was. Again, it was instant. One moment I was giggling with him and the next time losing it. Frustrated, he leaves the bed and heads for the doorway and I beg him to stay away from it. That it doesn't like that he's here and his presence is what is keeping it from entering the bedroom. He tries to calm me down and assures me nothing is there. This steps through the doorway into the kitchen and stops and turns to me and he's stark white. He is absolutely stunned. He says, "Yo, what is that?" and stumbles back into the kitchen. He tells me that he doesn't know what it is but he walked right through it. I'm screaming, "I told you." And I'm beyond freaked at this point. Remember, basement apartment and only one way out and it would mean I have to go through that bedroom doorway. BF gets angry and starts banging on doors and cabinets and slamming pots and pans and tells the thing it's not welcome here and to leave. After a bit of this, I don't feel it there anymore. He never doubted me again. We think it followed our friend home. She was always sad and melancholy, brooding. We think it was attracted to her and it then came downstairs to me because I could sense it. 100% true. Had other moments but nothing like that. Something, finally, verified by another. I still sense them but they leave me alone. People say shit like this doesn't exist and I tell you I know what I've sensed. Totally sober, clean, awake. We lost our 10-year-old husky to pericardial heart disease in August 2020. We noticed he was panting a lot, but we thought it was due to the hot summer temps. Anyway, one morning he couldn't get up the front porch steps. Took him to the vet, ran some tests and discovered that the pericardium, the sac surrounding his heart, was filling with fluid and was not letting his heart pump enough blood. Drained it twice and refilled each time. That night, around 10 p.m., Shadow passed away with us at his side. Needless to say, we were all crushed. I couldn't sleep and spent the night looking at pictures of him and our kids. About 6 a.m. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard scratching at the front door. The exact same scratching noise Shadow made when he wanted to come in. I ran to the door but he wasn't there. I don't have an explanation, but I want to believe it was him and that he wasn't ready to go and wanted to come back to us. Bit late to the party but there's been a few incidents in my parents' house that I want to share. I'm not sure if any of these truly count as distressing. Some of them are fairly mundane as far as paranormal activity goes. Also, I'm typing these as I remember them, not in chronological order, so sorry about that. The first one that comes to mind was after the death of a close family friend. For some context, he had been in a coma for a few weeks before his death and wasn't allowed visitors. Not sure if that was his family's choice or the hospital's policy. I was about 3 at the time, so my parents hadn't been able to visit him before he passed. In our house we would always leave the hallway light on. It hung near the bottom of the stairs. The morning after he passed the light was off. My mother spotted it before me. On first glance she thought the bulb had just blown, then she noticed that it had been removed from the light and placed carefully on the stairs but on a higher step than it would have been had it somehow fallen. My mother believes this was his way of saying goodbye before he went. Another time, when I was about 13, I had come home from school and decided to make a sandwich. We kept our bread right at the back of one of the counters and after making my sandwich I put it back in its rightful place. When I went back to the kitchen to put my plate in the sink, the room was freezing cold and the packet of bread was in the middle of the kitchen floor. I have absolutely no idea how it got there. This one actually terrifies me even though it's so mundane. There was another incident with the hall light when I was about 15. Myself and my mother were sat in the living room talking about the strange things we had seen and experienced in the house. The living room door was always open and from the door you can clearly see the hall light. We were also the only two in the house at the time. As we were talking, the hall light suddenly turns off. Again, we assumed the bulb had blown. It hadn't. It had been turned off at the light switch. Later that day we were in the kitchen still discussing the strange occurrences in the house when we heard the distinct sound of the heavy, wood front door opening. We both heard it because we looked at each other and agreed it was a bit early for my dad to be home from work. He also generally calls before he leaves, so it seemed odd. I poke my head out of the kitchen door and see a figure turning into the living room. I shout hello and get no response. We go to see what he's doing and there's nobody there. We are still the only people in the house. The front door was still locked. When I was about 19 I was sat at the dining table, which is kind of in the living room. It's a long open plan room, so the dining table is in the back half of the room and the living room area is the front half of the room. Only one door off the hallway to enter. doing some coursework for college when I saw out of the corner of my eye someone entering the room. They sort of just hung around at the end of the table. At the opposite end of the table is a big mirror hanging on the wall. It was like they'd walked in and then just stared at themselves in the mirror for a good few minutes. I was listening to my iPod while I worked, so I just assumed it was my mom doing something or talking to me without realizing I was listening to music. I looked up and nobody was there. My parents were both sat in the front half of the room just watching TV. I asked them if either of them had been in the kitchen or left the room for anything in the last 10 minutes, and they both said no. They'd both been watching the show for a good half hour without moving. I'd always get a strange vibe in the house as a child. I'd constantly see shadows and often hear noises. I'd hear people talking in empty rooms very frequently, and I would refuse to enter certain rooms alone until I was about 13. One time when I was about 5, I saw the shadow of someone pacing backwards and forwards in the bathroom doorway. I remember being absolutely inconsolable with fear and refused to go to the bathroom without my mom for the rest of the week. I constantly got the feeling I was being followed by the spirit of a young boy when I was living in their house. Somewhere on an old hard drive I have a selfie taken on a phone camera just after I got out of hospital after nearly dying from an undiagnosed medical condition, where you can see a figure of a young boy in the corner of my bedroom. He never felt malicious, but he was there. My mother also said that when I was in hospital she had also had many dreams featuring a young boy, and she felt his presence around me when I was in a coma. I'd also often catch a figure of a woman walking down the hall out of the corner of my eye. After a while I just started saying hello if I could feel a presence. Next time I go speak to my mom, I'll see if there's anything else she can think of that happened in the house. So late one night I wake up to someone shuffling through the stuff on my desk. I can see them standing there despite the dark. And so I say, "What do you think you're doing?" Assuming that it was one of my brothers looking to borrow one of my games, and the sound of stuff moving stops. The shape I can very clearly see freezes, but no one says anything. So my nearest flashlight was mounted on my handgun, so I reach over and grab that from the safe mounted into the top of my custom-built nightstand and turn it on and shine it around. No one was there. Get up and turn on the lights, check around the room, under the bed, all that jazz, trying to figure out where this person I clearly saw went. Check my desk to see if anything is missing. Nothing was missing, but things were definitely moved around. Go over and check my door. It was dead bolted shut. Still wonder WTF happened that night. I was 4 years old, and I used to sleep with my light dimmed and my bedroom door slightly ajar. I had begun waking up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, and from my pillow I could see through the open crack of the door into the dark landing outside. It started with me being able to see a dark figure pacing back and forth along the landing. Just a shadow really, but enough movement to tell. After a few nights of that, with me mostly just being confused but keeping quiet, I woke up and the shadow wasn't pacing anymore. It was standing where I could see it through the door crack, as if looking through to the room at me. It weirded me out, but I wasn't really old enough to understand yet. Still, after a night or two of that, I asked my parents to shut my door when they went to bed now. However, obviously that's not the end. So, houses built in the 80s/90s in the UK have tiny little windows above all the doors in the house. A night or two after having my door shut and thinking I was good, I vividly remember a hand pressed to the top of the window from the outside. It got worse after that. I woke up in the complete dark one night. My light dimmer had a bad habit of slowly ticking down to dark. I wasn't completely freaked out still, but had a light bulb moment. Hide under my sheets, perfect. So I did. I heard the floorboards outside my room creak as if something had walked over them. At which point, silhouetted by my tiny night light, a figure rose from the side of my bed. I had super thin sheets back then. I couldn't make out details, but it was big, bigger than an adult I had thought at the time. And it started to breath in deep, low slow breaths. Then I felt something on my head. I reached up, and there, as if holding the top of my head, was a hand, its skin very warm to the touch. I was still mostly confused at first, and called out, "Dad? Mom? Brother?" No response. Then I felt fingers wrap around my ankles. My sheets never moved. The figure leaned down as if leaning its face into mine through the sheets, though I couldn't make out its features. But I knew it was looking at me. That's when the real dread kicked in, a feeling I'd become familiar with forever. That cold, immobilizing fear of the unknown. I must have laid there with it for at least an hour, with it just holding me and standing there, no, and then leaning down to look at me, before I fell asleep. I asked my parents about it, Tried to tell them, didn't get believed, but they did buy me thicker sheets pretty soon after, and that's what became of every night. I'd wake up, hug the blankets in around me as if trapping them with my head, hands and feet kept me safe, hear the creak of the floorboards and the breathing would start. It started adding more hands till it was on my head, holding my wrists, holding my ankles, pressed to my back and stomach, and we'd stay there for an hour at least every night, me barely trying to make a noise or move, stuck in the terror. I still struggle to sleep in the dark or without something covering my head. I feel exposed at night, and I'm 32 now. It was nothing over the top. But I had this experience in my house once. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the living room, watched some anime in the couch on my phone. The living room ceiling lamp was lit and I was laying on the couch watching anime on my phone. I was facing away from the middle point of the room, where the ceiling lamp is. After 1.5 episodes, without doing anything else but watching the anime on my phone, I get this urge to look behind me. I look behind me and at that precise moment I saw a gray smoky kind of thing the size of a child. Nothing like a child though, just smoke and random form, near the ceiling, getting close to the ceiling lamp. The moment the smoke gets to the lamp, my lamp broke, the bulb died and the whole living room went dark. I just hid inside the blanket I had on me, stayed there for 2 minutes. And then eventually ran out of the living room. I wouldn't be surprised that the smoke was my eyes playing tricks on me. But the precise timing of it getting to the lamp and it failing. Bruh. And the urge to look behind me. Bruh. Scared the SHT out of me. Later I checked and the bulb was dead, had to get a new one. Surprisingly, this will be my first time posting this story, but I'm genuinely curious if anyone has a similar story. So I was young and was getting towards big boy age, so I started sleeping with no nightlight and the door closed. I had a dream about being on my school playground and dropping a bag of barbecue pop chips down into the middle of the spiral fire pole. And then I woke up and was sleeping on my side. All I saw in front of me was a black fingerless hand. It moved out of my vision, but as you can guess I was scared shitless. It was the strangest feeling, because I paid there for at least 20 minutes still and contemplating whether or not to scream out for my mom. But I was a big kid by this point, so I just chalked it up to being my imagination, and also I was scared that somehow I would be instantly murdered if I did anything. After a while of literally staying in the same position from when I woke up, like my muscles started to ache because I was just frozen. But I muttered up the courage to move my leg and extend from the bent position when I felt a hand just gently touch my thigh. And through nonverbal communication I got the vibe of just stop and don't move. It wasn't aggressive and surprisingly gentle, almost like a don't worry in a way. But after that I was just frozen still. And keep in mind that whatever this is behind me, and it was the strangest feeling. I knew that a hand was being waved over my body because I just felt it in me, if that makes sense. It just gave me a weird sensation over whoever the hand was hovering. And this continued from head to toe until sunrise. And about an hour before sunrise I felt something sit on the end of my bed. I was still terrified, so I didn't move until the sun was fully up and my room was illuminated. When I got up and looked around, there was a print at the end of my bed like something had sat there. Blah blah blah. Told my mom. Went to therapy, nothing came of it. I have no siblings and my door was never opened. Throughout all my living spaces, I still push my bed up to the wall so that I'm sure nothing can be behind me. And wake up in the middle of the night because I refused to toss and turn my back away from the wall. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I could still move, and I don't think part kid is demons touch you and leave imprints on your sheets. I had, what I felt was, a father/child combo in the condo my family and I owned. Prior to moving to where we are now, every night was insanity with the kids' toys and footsteps. It wasn't just the automatic/robotic toys playing their jingles, either. Balls would bounce around and things would constantly roll across the floor. The dad was constantly trying to mitigate the situation with regards to where the kid was and which toys the kid was playing with. It was as though the kid just wanted to play with everything and go anywhere, but the dad was always trying to corral the kid into a less noticeable corner of the living room and keep the toys quiet, which was in itself way louder than letting the kid simply do whatever. I know it was a dad or man, because the footsteps were of someone trying their hardest to be as quiet and tread as lightly as possible, and work boots. When the shoes would clunk and the floor would creak, it really sounded like someone who weighed 250 pounds. One night, I got out of bed and headed to the living room. I could hear a mad scramble on their part as I went from the bedroom to living room. Once I was there, I got down on my knees, elbows on the couch, Closed my eyes and said it's fine. Just let them play, we don't mind sharing. Back in bed and on the brink of falling back asleep, I heard a few footsteps and the creak of the couch when someone sits down. The Laugh and Learn puppy came on, another toy played a jingle, and the ball with the shapes inside rolled across the floor. I fell asleep, and after that night, we never heard from them again. I still feel bad that they left, but I also think they were able to move on, which is for the best. I seriously hope to meet them in the afterlife. So, I wouldn't say this was distressing, just unexplainable. The house I grew up in was definitely haunted, but it never felt it meant any harm until my niece was born. It started with me seeing black figures move past my doorway at night. I mentioned it to my parents once and they said it was probably just my imagination and didn't seem too concerned about it, so I just wrote it off. Then one day my sister and I were going out to the garage. We opened the door to the basement and a small black shadow, small like a cat or something, flew by us. We both moved out of the way at the same time, so I knew it wasn't just my imagination that time. We also had this sock that showed up in the middle of our living room. It had initials on it that didn't match anyone of my family. We just assumed one of our cats brought it in or something and threw it away. The next morning it was in the same spot as the night before. It didn't matter where we moved the sock to, it would end up in the middle of our living room. Once we actually took it to the dump, we never saw it again. And then my mom was upstairs and heard me yelling for her from the basement. She ran down there and nothing was there. I was next door at the neighbor's house. It was just little things like this until we were getting ready to move. It's almost like us packing up, said it. Cabinets would be found open. My sister and I started seeing the shadow figures almost every single night. My mom and I both heard humming coming from the hallway, and we were the only ones home, etc. But I think the absolute scariest thing was when my niece was born right before we moved. It was just my sister and I home, and we were in the living room watching TV. My niece was in her crib napping and all of a sudden started screaming and crying. I mean, she's a baby, so nothing too out of the ordinary there. Then I heard my sister scream my name. My niece had a huge red handprint across her back. We had pictures of it. The handprint was bigger than both mine and my sister's hands. Since we moved, never had any more weird experiences. What happened to me shaped who I am. I don't tell anyone and I don't expect to ever be believed. It's a horrible feeling. I was 10 and 12. Different houses. Completely different experiences. When I was 10, I woke up in the morning from a normal night's sleep, sat up and watched a ghost/spirit float from the roof in the corner of the room down to right next to me. He never broke eye contact. He sat next to me for a few seconds and disappeared. He was wearing what a 10-year-old would think was an old army uniform. You think you would be terrified, but it was nothing but pure peace, nothing like I've ever experienced. I ran out and told my mom straight away. She was so casual about it. Actually still annoys me to this day. She said, "Yeah, I seen the same man 10 years ago." Of course I didn't believe her, but she continued with 10 years ago I told Granddad, her dad, and he looked up our family history, paid for everything, and found a man named Jesse, same name as my brother, my mom's son, who died 7 years earlier, who worked as a train guard over 100 years ago, whose uniform resembled army uniforms. Had she not told my granddad, I never would have believed her. When I was 12, my mom had been abusing me and my siblings all day. Every day was hell, but this day was bad. She even got in the local newspaper for cheese grating my face on the road, smashing my face on the curb and then biting my cheeks while she pushed my face into the curb. I had to stay in my room all day. A consequence of not being able to find an item we all know. She hocked into cash converters. She was sick. The big fight started when I ran out to stop my mom bashing my little sister. We tried to escape and went to the police station, but the police of course drove us straight back to Mom's, where she acted normal and sent us to bed in front of the police. She went into my sister's room and blamed me for everything. "I love you, sweetheart. Can't you see this is all Laura's fault?" On and on she went. I could feel rage boiling inside me but didn't dare move or make a sound. She then came into my room and started bashing me. When she walked out, I felt the most rage I ever felt, even to this day. It felt like I reached the maximum amount of rage a human body can cope with. I looked up and this red human/animal face was right there in front of me, just his face, no body. I could recognize the human parts of the face, but there was something not human about it. That's why I say animal. I don't actually know what it was. This thing tried to make me kill my mom. It all happened within a few seconds, but just for a second. While looking at this demon thing, nothing else existed except killing her. I mean, nothing else existed. I felt myself reject the shit out of that. Whatever rage I thought I was feeling was gone. The demon thing was gone. I was in shock. I was in what I felt like was pure rage, but it was nothing compared to what emotion it takes to kill. Honestly, I get so angry thinking about never being believed. I'm a normal person who's seen both sides. Both sides of what? How can heaven and hell be real? I'm not religious, I've never been religious and never will. But honestly, we grow up hearing stories about this. And I have to live with the knowledge there's a shit ton of truth to it. I hate thinking about it, I try not to, but that's my experiences. This happened about 2 years ago. I was just having out in my room when I saw someone entered my room. Assuming it was my mom, I quickly tried hiding my phone and stuff and trying to explain, but I didn't see my mom or anyone. I just assumed it was my mind playing tricks on me again, as it usually does, and decided to just go to bed. When I turned off the lights and everything, I felt like I was being watched, so I looked up and I saw someone that looked like me but bony and almost like I was attacked by a bear or lion. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and flashed it, and it just wasn't there anymore even after I turned off the flashlight, so I did the logical thing and set up some lights so I could sleep. It was around Christmas time and my mom gave me some old lights we had, and for a month or two this would happen. I'd turn off the main lights, she'd show up in the corner of my room. I'd turn on the Christmas lights, she'd be gone. Until I was given a cross. Normally I don't believe in stuff like that, but something about that specific cross made her go away for good. It's still there in the same corner to this day, cause I'm paranoid that she'll come back if I move it. My husband likes to mess with me sometimes by whispering or mumbling silly things from across the room. One night, he was in the bathroom down the hall from our bedroom. I was sitting on our bed and heard some mumbled whispering, which I ignored. Then I heard by the faintest whisper, "Can you hear me?" I loudly said yes. My husband popped out of the bathroom and said, "Huh?" I replied, "Yes, I heard you." He said he hadn't said anything. I explained what I heard and he thought I was messing around with him. He got really freaked out when I said I was serious. Then I realized he was serious and hadn't been messing around with me, either. It freaked me out a little bit but seemed harmless. My husband was significantly more distressed. I had originally written this down a few years ago, but I did re-edit it cause I had some grammatical errors. I wouldn't say what happened to me was extremely distressing, but I was freaked out, and this happened at work, not my home, when I just graduated from HS over 10 years ago. I lived in a little town off the Chesapeake Bay, and the town itself is pretty old. It was originally settled in the 1680s. The coffee shop I worked at was a local favorite, and my boss's key lime pies were pretty well known outside our community. This was my first job ever, and I loved it. I started working with one other co-worker, but eventually I started closing shop by myself, which I loved. I would lock up, and plug in my iPod and get to closing everything down. As I would get closer to finishing up, I would feel like I was being watched. Nothing super paranormal happened. This was once a home and it was old, until one afternoon in July 2008. I had opened the shop, and I was working with my boss that day. A friend of hers came in and they were talking across the counter from each other. I was leaning on the counter, standing next to my boss. My hair was down that day, because I had forgotten my hair tie. There I was, leaning on the counter, not moving. All of a sudden, I felt fingers running through the top of my scalp, and then through my hair. I immediately stood up, grabbed my hair, and looked behind me. I'm not sure what I was thinking. My boss was to the left of me, and I had been looking in her general direction. Her sons were out with their grandparents that day, so it wasn't one of them messing with me. When I turned around, there was nothing. I was spooked though because it had felt like fingers. When I got home that afternoon, I kept testing out whether or not my hair had been laying a certain way, and had fallen, and that was what I had experienced. But nothing I did felt like fingers. Weird things had happened before that, but I never really thought anything of them. When I would lock up the house, and walk out to the front, where my vehicle was, there would be a light on in the attic, which I had never went into. But the next day it would be off, but be back on when I would leave. I would hear footsteps throughout the house. The wood floors were original, and they would make a lot of noise, and some of the furniture would wobble, which would make noise too, when someone would walk across them. But I didn't think much of it. I really didn't want to, because once I did, I would get more and more anxious and start thinking of all sorts of scenarios. My worst experience though was when I was closing up one night. I had just gotten back from locking the sliding doors on the patio, and locked the front door, and I just started cleaning the dishes. I had forgotten my iPod that day, so I didn't have any music playing, so it was pretty silent in the shop. So there I was, washing dishes, when all of a sudden I heard all the wind chimes on the front porch go off. I screamed and ran out the back door as fast as I could. There I was, on the back patio, freaking out. Thankfully I had my phone in my pocket, and I called my mom. Lol. She was, of course, skeptical, but listened to me explain to her what had just happened. She said that I must have left one of the sliding doors open, and that I should walk around to the front and check them. I did, with her still on the phone. None of them were open. I even tried to open them up, but they were all locked, which I knew they were going to be. My mom was a little uneasy about that, but said that I need to finish cleaning up and that she would stay on the line with me. Once I finished with the dishes, which had to have been a record, I turned off the kitchen lights and locked up. The next day, I told my boss what had happened. She was concerned, but said that it was probably only Elizabeth. Of course, I bombarded her with questions. She really only told me basic, probably gossip, stuff. Elizabeth lived in the home in the late 1800s and she was crazy. She may, or may not have killed herself on the property. There was apparently another ghost in the house too, William. He had been crazy too. My boss wasn't sure if William was before, during, or after Elizabeth. My boss shared some of her own experiences in the house. One of my favorites was the little Coke bottle that kept reappearing in the attic. My boss would always throw it away, but it kept popping up in the same spot. She also dealt with the attic light turning on and off, and had heard voices and the footsteps. Depends on your definition of distressing, but when I was 4 or 5-ish I had to go to the bathroom, and my room is right across from the bathroom. As I was going across the hall I had an intensive pulling my head to look to my left. At first I didn't see anything, but then I saw 2 glowing red eyes 6 to 7 get high. The one thing I remember is that it was 8 feet down the hallway. I was almost frozen and great, but I bolted into the bathroom and stayed in the bathroom for what felt like forever. We bought a house last year. Freshly remodeled but built in the early 60s. We live in a county that has a very bad history as far as native slaughters go. We live on what was once Pomo land. Very dirty, sad history. Hiking in the area is unsettling. It's a small town that just seems stuck in time. Very little endeavors are successful here and a majority of the people are on drugs. Anyways, 8 months in I put my kids to bed. Both girls ages 11 and 6. Hours go by and all is quiet. Eventually my partner goes to bed. I stayed up scrolling TikTok and smoking. I get off late, so this is my quiet unwind time. It's about 1 a.m. My German Shepherd, who is generally submissive and quiet, starts growling so loud I can hear her from the patio. Our house is rather large, but we have 3 large sliding glass doors in the patio. We can see both girls' rooms. I gave my dog the command to hush because there's no threat. She goes off every few minutes. Next thing I know, from the corner of my eye I see my 6-year-old walking down the hall through the windows. She has super curly red hair and was wearing a hot pink Hello Kitty nightgown, pretty hard to miss. After hearing rustling and her not getting back to her room after a minute or two, I went to check on her. At this point the only light on is the patio, which shines in the sliding glass doors, making the hall visible. I went in and started flipping on lights. No sign of her in the kitchen or living room, but I heard something in my partner's office. As that room is off limits, I stomped over to it, ready to be irritated with whatever she was getting into. I flipped on the light and nothing. It freaked me out, so I trotted my pudgy ass down the hall. There she was in bed, soundly sleeping, tucked in with her stuffies, just as she had been when I put her to bed. I thought maybe I was just tired and seeing and hearing shit. I went back out to smoke and watched the hall like a hawk. After 20 minutes there was nothing. As I was about to put my cigarette out, I heard my dog growl again. This time more vicious than before. I snapped my head up to see my 6-year-old zooming down the hall. She stopped, blew me a kiss, and ran towards my partner's office. Again I followed, and again she was nestled in bed. I'm not sure what to make of this, and it's been months, but every now and then I catch a glimpse of my kids who are not actually there. It's not very distressing, but I swear there's a ghost in the house. It's not that far of a stretch because we live literally across from a cemetery. I could read some of the headstones from my window if I wanted to. My mom has seen a lot of it. She found 3 different types of bugs and 2 of them went away after a week and turned to strung. She's also found blood on the walls. Only the 2 of us live here, so where that would come from is beyond us. There was a time I was looking for the remote for at least an hour, looking, stripping the couch, looking some more. Eventually, I got on the ground to look underneath the couch, and 5 minutes later, right where I was sitting was the remote, perfect straight. There was no way it was attached to me. There was also the time I was laying down with my eyes closed because they hurt. I wasn't sleepy/tired at all, and I felt the footsteps of someone content near the end of my bed, and felt like they were tucking in my feet. I looked up as they had gotten to my feet and no one was there, and the two people in the house were asleep across the hall and busy cooking downstairs. We've made jokes about it being a poltergeist house or how the ghost is of my mom's friend that we found in the cemetery, but it kinda freaks me out a bit. So, I grew up in Brazil in a suburban area. In my house lived me, my parents and my younger brother. The house was one of those wooden houses that made creaking sounds when you walked. I was 15 and my brother 11 at the time. I have always been attuned to paranormal things. I had seen ghosts when I was very young and had many cases of predicting near future, reading people's minds, and once I swear some form of telepathy. I had a sixth sense. I had most of my life felt lightly uncomfortable about my house. I didn't know why. A heavy aura, and in the months leading to this event it became much stronger. Nightmares were a little more frequent. At night I felt a constant unease as it became darker. Coincidentally, or not, my brother had begun to sleepwalk. It was freaky. My mother had told me, but I hadn't seen it happening till about a week before the event. I and my mother were watching a movie in the living room. My dad had gone to bed and so did my brother. Suddenly I saw by the corner of the eye that my brother had quickly gone from his bedroom to the toilet, opposite his room. But didn't turn the lights on. A few seconds after my mom went there and walked him back to his bed. He was sleepwalking. From the couch I could see into my brother's room and half of his bed. A few minutes after he had gone back to bed, suddenly he sat up, really stiff, and turned to look in our direction. His eyes were wide open, not moving, not blinking. I poked my mom and pointed at him. I wasn't afraid, I think, but I was a little spooked. My mother started going in his direction, but he laid down again. That was it for that night. A week passed. I remember even telling my mates at school about how freaky was my brother sleepwalking. I went to bed and the feeling of unease had grown so much that I couldn't sleep. My room was next to my brother's. My door was open and one dimmed light stayed on overnight in the corridor that connected all three bedrooms. I could not stop looking at my door. I was really alert. Something wasn't right. It was probably near midnight and I still couldn't sleep, when I heard my brother's bed creaking. In my mind I thought, not again. Somehow I had now this fear that my brother could hurt me while sleepwalking, but the floor was all floorboards, and even being the ninja I was at sneaking quietly out of my bedroom at night to watch TV, I knew that if someone walked, especially in my brother's room, the floor would make noise. I knew around the whole house where I could and could not step if I wanted to be quiet. It was impossible to get out of my brother's bed without making any noise. In the middle of the night any tiny sounds felt much louder, and I felt comfort that my brother didn't seem to be getting out of his bed. But the air had gone colder, dense, scary. I pulled my blankets close to my face and I could just see my door. I couldn't take my eyes off it for some reason, until a black, transparent, smoke, for lack of a better way to describe it, quickly passed by my door, coming from my brother's room towards living, dining and kitchen. It covered the whole door for a second. The door was large, larger than most new doors nowadays. I froze. I got so scared and was hoping I could just wake up from this nightmare. At first it was dead silent, but it didn't last long. Heavy stomping began coming from the living room. I was a strong teenager, 185 meters 6 feet, and I know even I could not stomp that hard with all my strength. I could not believe my parents were not waking up. It stopped. Not sure if to my relief or meaning it was about to do something else. I was scared. It then began alternating between a blunt wood bang and a metallic sound, similar to chains being tossed and dropped. To me it felt that it kept going for at least 15 minutes. I didn't know what to do, never been that scared in my life. Suddenly, just as it started, it stopped. And seconds later I see my mother walking past my room, coming from hers and my brother's bedroom towards the kitchen. I hid in my blankets and she didn't see I was awake. A few minutes later she returns. With my brother. But. My brother never went that way, there was no other way. Only the smoke past my door. I was 100% sure. Nevertheless, the sight of my mother must have calmed me down. After a while I managed to fall asleep. Next day. This was in the middle of the week, Thursday I think. And for the first time ever my uncles, aunties and grandmother came to my house in the middle of the week, not even for dinner. They were all taking on the dining room while me and my brother watched TV. I got intrigued considering what happened last night and was trying to eavesdrop on them. They were also being unusually quiet. I tried and then I heard it. Ghost. That was it. I had to join that conversation. But as I went towards them they quickly noticed and clearly changed subject. My mother asked me what did I want. I asked what were they talking about. She tried to brush it off but I continued with, is it about the ghost last night? They all got caught by surprise. My mom asked me what did I know about it and I told her what I had seen and heard. They were surprised, they didn't know about that. My mother then told me what happened after I saw her the night before. She said she walked to the dining and to the kitchen, all lights were off. But when she turns the kitchen light on there is my brother. Waking, trying to walk towards the kitchen sink, with one drawer open and many knives on the bench. One on his hand. His eyes were open wide and he didn't respond. She approached him, took the knives away and gave him a hug. Gently pulled him towards a chair where she sat and put him on her lap. She attempted to talk to him with no success then guided him back to his bedroom. He lay down quietly and slept. She went back to her bed and fell asleep, but my mother looks at me and says, that wasn't all that happened that night. After she went back to sleep later that night both my parents woke up suddenly on the middle of the night. Their door was half open and both of them say they see a large black smoke enter their room and move next to their bed. My mother says she became mute, she couldn't speak, she tried to scream but nothing. Her arms and legs, however, were swinging at it, trying to push it away to no success. My father said the opposite happened to him. He was paralyzed, his body stuck to the bed but he never screamed so loud in his life. That smoke hovered over the bed for a few moments and then just left the room. Within a few seconds my father said he could now move. He jumped from the bed to check on me and my brother. We were both sleeping. He said he checked all windows and doors, all locked. He went back to the bed but they could not sleep again that night. This is why my family had come to my house. My parents were scared. My grandmother had brought holy water to bless the house. I think it was pointless honestly. The reason I didn't say anything before was because after that night, that same morning the heavy aura I used to feel in the house was gone. My brother never slept walk again. It was as if something was building up and it went off with a blast. All of its energy used in that last event. We lived in that house for another 3 years before moving overseas. During that time I had some minor sixth sense type of situations, but nothing like that night ever happened again. My grandparents bought land and initially lived in a trailer there while building their home. My mom lived in the trailer with them and told me many stories, but the most disturbing was about something crawling on the ground beside her bed and whispering her name. She also had something get in the bed and lay down beside her. After the house was built, she started messing with Ouija boards and actually had to tell her the name of the man she actually married later in life. His name was Shannon, which she thought was weird at the time because it seemed more like a girl's name. The thing she was talking to told her what it looked like and she woke up with it standing over her bed one night. She would wake up in the middle of the night and it would have turned off every light. She lived in a downstairs apartment at the time and would purposely leave on the TV and several other lights. I lived in the house and wound up moving into her old bedroom and eventually into the downstairs apartment. It came out one night when I had friends over, slammed doors, ran through the upstairs of the house, talked to us on recording. My friend saw the ghost of our dead cat walk through the wall. Same cat got in bed with my grandma once. I saw the shadow of something with horns on my wall one night. There are stories about this thing going into my grandma's room from before I was born. I had a man moan in my ear once while I was up drawing around 2 a.m. alone. My mom's ex actually saw her in the downstairs den and that version of her floated through the furniture. He was a big guy and had served time in prison but was legit terrified with his arm hair standing up after he saw it. I saw a ghost of myself in an empty mirror once. There are more stories, but these are the main ones that always creeped me out. I think my mom using the Ouija board riled things up, but things started before she ever even did that, so I thought maybe it could be an Indian burial ground or something. I will mention that in a previous house in a previous relationship while I was pregnant with my now 6-year-old my ex-partner and I would hear what could only be described as a large rock rolling on our hardwood floors. The night I went into labor I went out to get some water and every single cabinet door was open and swinging back and forth in rhythm. I screamed for my partner, and when he made it to the kitchen they were still swinging. He, freaked out, reached up and touched one and they all stopped at the same time. We both were freaked out and went to our room and put on a funny movie to calm our nerves. 30 minutes into it we heard the rolling. I freaked out and stood up and boom, NY water broke. This is serious. Every fifth night my tablet turns on and plays some random song at exactly 12:22 a.m. I have recorded it multiple times just to check the recording when I wake up, just to see my laptop just turn on to Spotify. I've deleted Spotify twice. It just appears to Spotify if it's not paranormal activity. Please someone help me fix it. It's gone to highway to hell 3 times if that means anything. I'm so late, but I've gone through a few wild things. The first I don't remember as I was very young, but my parents rented a seriously old house at the time that with train tracks in the backyard, no joke. A house that my mom claimed was used in the war, assuming a civil war, to aid wounded soldiers. I don't really remember the house, but my bedroom there was previously a porch, so, Lamau, it was old. One night I ran crying from my room yelling, "Mommy, the man. The man is in my room." I don't remember that at all. My dad immediately went to check and nothing. According to my mom, I tended to sleep on the floor next to my parents' bed as a kid because I was afraid to be alone at night. Even when we moved out of that house and into their permanent house, I would sleepwalk out into the living room as well. One night I was laying on the couch with arm hanging off up over the arm of the couch. I was still asleep until I felt a very small hand in mine. I woke up very quickly. I was still very young, so I don't remember what happened after that. That house was wild. I'd stepped into the kitchen one night suddenly. Across the kitchen was the laundry room and you and see the dryer from the entrance of the kitchen. There was a black TV fuzz plume of matter in front of the dryer that dissolved into nothing the moment my presence entered, and the dryer door fling open hard suddenly. I have no explanation for that one. I was fully awake in my mid-teens at the time. One night a group of us were walking around. It was getting late and we stopped in front of some older, big dark houses, and my good friend suddenly paled. At the same time I felt something behind me. An overwhelming feeling. There's someone behind me, isn't there? All my friend could do was nod. We dipped so fast, lol. My friend told us later it was a little boy that had been behind me. Dude, I gotta contact them and get their version of that one. Around that same time I had my desk set up in an L and was doing something later at night. Lights on when I felt hands on my thigh. I froze and looked down at the desk on my side and there was a man sitting under it. He was smiling, grinning before he laughed and disappeared. I jumped up so fast. I was on top of my chair panicking because what the hell, lol, I really can't explain it at all. I never saw him again. None of that stuff followed me from Missouri to my new life in the West. No idea why. I experienced a lot of trauma that wasn't supernatural as well, so TBH, what's real or not, but those things really impacted me. The thing is, I don't find paranormal activity distressing. Banging cupboards, footsteps on stairs when you know no one's there, stuff flying off a table, but not at anyone, a door opening by itself, I just don't find it frightening. Maybe it's because, unlike ghost hunting TV shows, the activity is random and not very often. Just enough to notice. Do you guys think an entity can be called into a space based on the people in it kinda idea? My family became almost unhealthily obsessed with ghost stories etc. about 3 years ago. And all of a sudden stuff started happening to us. Having lived in the same house for 17 years without incident, we truly believe it was us that brought the spirit into the place. We stopped ever talking about them. Never told another story and never even mentioned the word ghost again. And it took 3 months more of the creepiness, about a year total, then there's been nothing since. There's so many stories, I'm sorry I wouldn't even know which one is best to start with. Probably the most unhinged one is that I was in the shower and my phone away from me. Right downstairs, yet someone called my mom from my phone. And when she answered there was just indistinguishable whispering. This happened in the house I still live in, about 6 years ago. I am now 21, and I was around 15 at the time. 2-story house, built in the 70s I believe. I do not know anything about previous owners. My bedroom is on the top floor, furthest from the stairs. On the other side of the second floor is my parents' bedroom, with direct access to the attic, which stretches across the top of the house and above my room. Anyways, I was kept up at night for around a year by what sounded like scratching coming from the attic. My parents only have a few boxes up there, on their side of the house, right by the entrance. Other than that it was unused and unexplored. Typically I would turn on the ceiling fan to drown out the noise, listen to podcasts, and do whatever I could to drown it out. But it was very annoying. I told my parents about it multiple times. They shrugged it off and said it was likely rats or birds nesting. But it sounded different, unrhythmic, repeated scratching on the floor up there, only in the late hours of the night, after midnight. During this time, I had a recurring nightmare, where I was in the house alone. It was dark, and I knew I had to escape. I would quietly make my way to the front door and end up running down the street, only to see a cloaked figure coming after me, that I could not outrun. The dream would always end right before they caught up to me, and I didn't dare look back. I just woke up. Well, one night, it caught me. I felt it grab me like hot ice, it burned cold, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I woke up to see that a fresh wound, almost directly in the center of my solar plexus, below my breasts. It was 3 clean cuts of varying length, diagonally across my chest down there, not very deep but they were bleeding. It looked like a cat scratch, however I did not have a cat, and I have always bit my nails short due to anxiety, so there's no way it could have been self-inflicted as I didn't have sharp nails. I told my dad the next day, and he finally went up to the attic while I was at school. I asked him if he found anything. He didn't say much about it other than that the attic was empty and no signs of rodent activity. I've asked about it since then, and he claims he has no recollection of ever going up there. The scratching stopped after that. I haven't heard it since. I still have the scars though, 3 clean marks about 3 inches long, just below my right breast. I try not to think about it, and I don't have any explanation for what could have happened to cause those marks. I lived in a basement a few years ago. It started getting weird with the noises in the kitchen, of plates shifting around at night and such, then things on my desk would fall over, no matter how far from the edge I put them. All these small things you could possibly give an explanation to. Well, it's been years and I still have no explanation for the following. This was Rome in August, so very warm. I was up on my phone until late, then I decided to set it down for sleep, and I remember perfectly the sudden sense of dread I felt, paired with a sensation of being super cold, out of nowhere. Weirded out, I sat down on the bed and got under the covers, and then I saw it, a big, gray and electric blue cloud of smoke moving above my head, floating in my room and then through the wall. I was paralyzed by fear for a good 5 minutes, then I went in my mother's room. To make matters creepier, my landlord, who lived above us, claimed that his house was haunted, without me mentioning my own experiences, and that he would see a naked woman running through his quarters. I was 16 years old. I wasn't high, it certainly wasn't a dream, it couldn't possibly be a light reflection of any kind, a trick of the eye or actual smoke from somewhere. I'm not a religious person and I would consider myself a skeptic, but I know what I saw. I think these are the kind of things you can't believe in until you've experienced them. When I was a toddler, I would refuse to go to the bathroom alone because there was a little boy that would scare me. I remember hearing something running around upstairs and my grandma telling me everything was okay. When I was older, my mom told me the day we moved into that house she was all alone and saw a little boy walking down the stairs. A different house when I was about 7 to 8, I woke up to a girl playing in my bedroom that was all white. Years later I found out a little girl died in that house in the 40s. When I was a teenager, I was out back of my friend's house in the woods in the winter and we kept hearing this little girl crying/laughing. Saw shadows moving around 10 feet away from up there was snow on the ground. We knew it wasn't an animal. Guess there was a girl in this little clubhouse building and one night a bunch of drunk teenagers burned it to the ground while she was inside one night with her inside. I think she was in there because she was sad because her dad just passed away and they built the clubhouse together. All this paranormal activity started the day my cousin moved into his new home. It's a simple one-story home in our hometown and was spacious enough for him and his roommates. The only thing is the creepy shit that happens in that home. At first it was just things like lights being turned off when you leave the room, and then they're turned on when you come back. My cousin had just brushed it off thinking it was just his roommate. But soon things took a turn for the worst. I was sleeping over once during summer break, and we heard a high-pitched screech from the basement. It was around 12 a.m. and we were still awake playing video games. We rushed down to the basement and saw literally no one. The next day it was all fine until lunch came around. This time we heard a bang from the attic. We went up to see. We'll only my cousin because me and his roommate were practically shitting ourselves. When he told us it was all clear, we all took one last look at the attic and waiting there was a head popping out of the corner. My cousin, me, and his roommate ran so fast out of the house and into the car, he moved out to another place and sold the house a month later, saying that he never wanted to go back to that hell house. This is probably gonna get lost. My family has always had these gifts. From dreams of the future to seeing spirits. Shit's weird. Well, when my mother was pregnant, she had a dream about a boy. In the dream, she was holding a little boy with blue eyes and really curly hair. She believed that this is what I would look like. I had wavy hair and hazel eyes. Well, years later, I must have been 15 at the time, I was playing video games on my Xbox. We had a projector, and whenever the Xbox was off, the projector would go to a solid blue screen and search for an input. Well, I had just turned off the Xbox and all of a sudden the shadow of curly hair rose on the blue. It was as if someone had stood up and their hair blocked some of the projector. The problem was that I was sitting on a chair directly below the projector. Weirdly, I was not afraid. Veiled 3 years later, it is Christmas and my whole family were sharing their experiences. As it turns out, my brother saw the kid in a dream too. Sorry, it is not very distressing. I do have another though. At the time, my mom, dad and brother are outside fixing a pipe. While they are working on the pipe, I am typing out a report. For some reason all the lights in the house are off, including the room I am in. All of a sudden I get a chill and turn toward the doorway to the room. I see a sock slowly start to move from the other side of the doorframe. The sock looked as though a kid had stuck their hand in it to make a sock puppet. The sock puppet stopped, turned toward me, then slowly creeped out of view. The entire time I was petrified with fear. I don't think I even breathed. That messed me up for a little bit. We were raised by our grandparents. My earliest memories involve what my grandmother called the little white ghost. This ghost would turn lights off and on, walk the halls, flush the toilet and move/hide objects that we would later find in the oddest places. The two scariest events happened one morning and then a different night. I was fixing breakfast early one morning before school and thought I heard someone behind me. I thought it was one of my brothers sneaking up on me. I turned around really fast and caught a glimpse of something light blue, maybe white. One of my brothers had PJs that color. So I set my breakfast aside and started chasing him upstairs to his room. However, when I got upstairs, I realized everyone was still asleep and in bed. I checked my brother, he was really asleep. I had to go back downstairs by myself and finish getting ready for school. Had jitters all day. The second scariest for me happened one night after me, my brothers and grandmother were in bed. We kept hearing someone walking in the hall. My grandmother kept shouting for us to get in the bed and quit fooling around, and we all kept saying it wasn't us. This went on for at least an hour. Finally I heard my grandfather's car pull into the garage and thought, finally, now this will stop. I heard Granddaddy come into the entry, remove his work boots and walk to the kitchen, and I fell asleep. The next morning at breakfast we were talking about what had happened the night before. I said I sure was glad when Granddaddy had gotten home. My grandmother just looked at me and told that he had to work a double shift and he hadn't gotten home yet. Totally creepy. There are so many more stories from when my mom was young, but those were the two scariest things that I personally experienced. I'm not exactly sure if it counts, but I rarely get to mention it. When I was in the 6th grade, I was trying to get to sleep one night, and an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up. I looked to the other side of my room and saw a weird-looking thing floating in the air. It slowly turned around, and I got a better look at it. It was a human head, or looked like it at least, but with not teeth, nose, or eyes. Just empty sockets, and its skin and hair were red because of the blood pouring out of every spot. The blood dripped and pooled on the ground. I was terrified. I moved my hand towards my lamp for some reason, but my arm and the rest of me felt really heavy. Then the head started slowly floating towards my bed. I was panicking at this point, using all of my strength to reach my lamp as it dyed my carpet floor even more with its blood. It didn't show any emotion either, its expression was just blank. It finally makes it to the foot of my bed when I reach my lamp and everything's gone. No blood on the floor, no head floating, and no extreme weight. I never saw that thing again. But it sure left an impression. I used to hear and see shadow figures in my house at night when I was 6/7. It always happened when I was alone and at night. I should mention I was hit by a car at 6 years old. I suffered a very small brain injury which has made my left side of my body weaker than the right. I don't know if the shadow people, what I will call them, was because of the brain injury, but anyway I was terrified to be alone and never went upstairs by myself for at least 2 years. The shadow people have disappeared, but I do occasionally hear tapping. One time I was asleep in a recliner and a glass bowl was on a table next to me. The table is about 1 to 2 inches from the side of my recliner and my back is facing the table. Next thing I know I hear the bowl come crashing to the floor and I turn over sitting bolt upright, scanning the room for intruders, but nobody is there. The bowl, which is about 3 inches tall, squeezed between the armrest and table and fell to the ground. Everything on the table looks like somebody had set their arm on the table and slid everything towards me. I used to constantly get the feeling that I was being watched, but that has subsided now. So I don't think this is extremely distressing, but you be the judge. From the ages of 8 to 9 my aunt lived in the old house that was turned into a duplex kind of thing. Split between a top and bottom unit. It was a huge house before, built in the 1920s. The story told to me was a teacher in the 40s hung herself from the railing over the stairs, and my aunt ended up with the top unit with the same unchanged stairs leading up. I stayed with my aunt plenty and had a lot of experiences with a ghost that haunted the place. It initially started pretty small things, like the TV may turn on, off, or change channels once in a while. And sometimes I would hear a floorboard squeak, nothing alarming, until things started to get aggressive, like really aggressive. My aunt told me that things had gotten bad when she would hear a groaning in an adjacent room, running when home alone, doors opening and closing, cabinets would open even if you waited and watched. And one night I stayed at her house with my cousin, and we were having a good time, then out of nowhere it sounded like a giant was running down the hallway that leads from the kitchen, past the living room where we were, past other rooms, all the way to the front of the house. This dark mass flies past and we all feel a rush of air. We freeze, we think it's someone playing a joke. My aunt calls out, no response, nobody in the hall or other rooms. We go back to the living room, sit down, and the TV starts flipping channels insanely fast, then stops. Then the 3 doors that lead to the living room slam one at a time, really hard. My aunt looks terrified, and my cousin was scared stiff. I was literally on the verge of freaking out. I'm 9 and witnessing a violent haunting. I wanted to run, but I wasn't sure what was at the bottom of the dark stairs to the front door. I didn't sleep that night and called my mom to come pick me up. My aunt even recounted that night after they went to bed she heard a woman's voice in her toddler's room saying, "Give me your baby." Somehow the door was locked and had to break the door in to get inside. She moved not too long after that incident. The craziest thing, my aunt kept the coffee table and couch she had with her to a newly built home and it followed her. And didn't stop until she threw the furniture away. I've never really shared this story because it can sound absurd at times. My friends and I saw smoke on first floor and we cannot find our parents, but we heard their voices. After couple days there was a fire in kitchen on first floor and one person was sleeping in room during it. He managed to survive and call firefighters. We haven't talked about that since that day. More than 10 years ago one night a mirror got off from the wall and ended up at the floor more than 2 meters away from the wall. Water was running and mirror was on carpet. It was like hit in the middle, no other cracks or pieces off. My parents were shocked and they told that to our friends after couple years after that. Depends on what counts. I've seen things I thought was someone I lived with but they were still upstairs to dream to sleep, traveling like astral projection but more. When I was about 12 I saw a ghost, but this is a ghost of someone who killed his own wife in my bedroom, then killed his 2 sons in the living room and then killed himself in my room. I hear the voices of his sons and wife and his footsteps, saying I am next or something. I don't really understand. Stand it. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.